each day, in the mornings usually, from my book, A Gracious Space. This is the fall book, and each book has 50 readings in it. We also have a winter book and a spring book. Right now, we're already to day 41. So after today, there are only 8 more. And then once I've read them all, we're done. Done for A Gracious Space Fall. And A Gracious Space Winter will come after that. So if you're interested in purchasing either book, you can click on the link that I put inside the message that goes with this live broadcast. That link goes directly to The Gracious Space Winter, but you can always browse our products to find fall. These books come in 2 versions. They come in a digital version if you want it for like Kindle, or they also come in a book form that you can get from Amazon, which is what this looks like. So let's make sure here that we're not screwing up the sound, okay? Because that's the mistake I made earlier. All right, then, let's get started. Today, oh, Carolyn, I'm so glad. It's fun to see you, British Columbia, Canada. Well, that's what I need to do. We need to do some in the afternoon so we don't leave out all of our lovely West Coast friends. I'm originally from Los Angeles, and I know what it's like to be left out. Yes, Dana, great Christmas gift idea. You anticipate me, darling. In fact, I'm just going to tell you because you guys are so nice to be on. We have a special treat coming. Our Poetry Tea Time brand, if you guys know that we have poetryteatime.com as a website, we have come up with our own custom designed tea to sell for Christmas and Hanukkah and Kwanzaa and all of the end of the year holidays. So if you are interested in finding out more about that, I will be sharing it next week. So I'm very excited for that. So yes, we'll have the books to sell, we'll have tea to sell, and some other treats just for holiday shopping if you're interested. All right, so let's read from this book today. Today is on one of my favorite topics, writing. How did you know? All right, you ready? Wonderful. So here we go. I'm reading from A Gracious Space Fall, day 41, and the reading is called, Once They Catch On, Look Out. My kids are getting it. I'm seeing this theme come through on Facebook, in email, and through phone calls. What are these kids getting? That what is going on inside the mind life deserves a home on paper. As parents hear their children's thoughts expressed in oral language and help those thoughts get to paper, more and more kids take the risk to cut out the parent step and try it for themselves. It's crazy, really. We spend all this time explaining how important writing is. We tell them to follow X model or imitate Aesop or just write 3 lines. And they show us their sad, uncooperative faces instead. The brilliance of their quirky personalities is hidden behind attempts to sound like someone else. Everyone is demoralized. Yet if we flip the script, start hearing what our kids are saying in that spontaneous, not school moment, jot down what they say out of our own enthusiasm to preserve the insight, thought, joke, or snatch of story, they perk up. This is what you wanted me to write, is the thought. You think what I have to say is important enough to write on paper, is the next thought. Young children especially will respond with, well, in that case, behaviors. They will scratch images and misspelled words onto sheets of paper, trying to impress you again. You will be impressed. This child who didn't know what to write suddenly has things to say on paper. The spelling, punctuation, and capitalization of the words will still seem so much less important, and rightly so, when you see the child taking such initiative. Your only task is to fan the flame. Enthuse. Supply cool writing utensils. Create little booklets, paper folded in half, stapled between a sheet of construction paper, and read the results aloud to the child and anyone else in the family who will listen. The momentum this process creates is entirely different than required writing at a desk every day. Here are a couple necessary caveats. 1, for reluctant writers who don't trust you because they feel the weight of pressure coming from you, or those who adopt a bored gaze, this is for parents whose kids get suspicious when they effuse too much. Pay attention to these thoughts. When you hear your kids expressing, show enthusiasm and jot it down. But when they write on their own, simply acknowledge it matter-of-factly and then ask hours later if you can read it. Ask plainly, without overstating how proud you are, so there is room for this child to enthuse or even dislike his or her own work. Then, when you do read the writing, praise the content by engaging it. I love how the princess gets out of trouble, or I didn't know that about amphibians. 2. Writing programs that teach kids to copy other writers' imitation sometimes stunt the writing voice. Initially, your young writer may look like he or she is imitating a style more than showing his or her natural writing voice. Time will heal this tendency the more you support and encourage the natural speaking voice to show up on paper by capturing it and recording it. 3. Pictures are writing too. Any attempt to symbolize language is writing. So if a child is writing picture books without words, affirm the child is writer. As we know, there are loads of wordless books on the market. We find them in libraries. Ask your child to read the book to you. You'll discover so much thought life and language happening in those pictures. As the child gains skill, words will begin to emerge too. Passion for writing comes in bursts, number 4. It's a creative activity. A child may write 16 little books in a month and then do nothing for 6 months. Do not treat writing like an onerous task. Treat it like the creative outlet that it is. You can always gin up more enthusiasm for writing by changing the setting. Write somewhere else. Use new utensils. Add brownies. Change the time of day to write. 5. Read what they write during the read aloud time. Put the finished products right in the library basket and read them each day. Most kids love this. Those who don't, honor their choice to not be read aloud. Above all, value what your kids express and get some of it into writing. Quote of the day. Thank you for sharing. I have found this method to be true with nearly any subject. It is way more fun and inviting. Heidi Marie Gillihan, Sustaining Thought. Discover the writer within your child and his or her true voice by encouraging self-expression on topics of interest and putting those words on paper. So this message today is all about writing. What fosters it? What creates that feeling that your kids want to get themselves out and onto paper? In most writing programs, there is a simultaneous focus on original thought and the mechanics of writing. There's some notion that if we could just teach kids how to spell, handwrite, punctuate, paragraph, quote, and gave them a model, they would feel much more comfortable self-expressing those original thoughts. But the fact of the matter is, that's not what happens. When we overburden children who are just learning to self-express in writing with the pressure of accuracy in the mechanics while conceiving of these original thoughts, we usually see a breakdown. That's where writer's block comes from. Writer's block is simply the inability to manage both the mechanics and original thought simultaneously. When those two are trying to work together in the mind, it feels overwhelming to a child who doesn't have automatic ability in the mechanics. In other words, it's a bit like speaking a foreign language, where you have to spend a lot of time thinking about what to say rather than just saying it. When we place that dual demand on our child, saying, you need to come up with the original thought, but while you're thinking the thought, you've also got to get the spelling correct. You've also got to remember capitals and periods. We are overloading a not yet developed system. And what happens is that kids have to make a choice. It's like triage in the ER. They have to decide what's more important in this moment, the content I'm thinking about or my current ability to spell it and punctuate it. When kids think that the priority needs to be the mechanics, they respond in 2 ways. The first is they will dumb down the content to match their mechanical skill. You know what that means? They write these really weak, insipid sentences, even though 5 minutes ago they rattled off a whole story or fully explained the workings of Mario Kart. And you think, why did you only write, "I love Mario Kart, it's fun to play," when you just told me a whole paragraph's worth of information with sophisticated language and clauses and all of that? It's because your child doesn't feel comfortable punctuating and spelling the complex thought, but they feel safe writing, "I love Mario Kart, it's fun to play." On the flip side, if they prefer their original thought and they go off into this detailed retelling, they will jettison their allegiance to accurate mechanics, all so that they can get those thoughts out without being sidetracked by which direction does the B or the D go, and does accommodate need 2 C's or 2 M's or neither. They'll just tell you the information the best they can, but it's not going to look good. It won't be pretty, because it takes 10 years to become fluent in the mechanics of writing. 10! From age 8 to 18. So what does that mean about a 9-year-old? Well, a 9-year-old's like a toddler in writing. She's still learning to get comfortable with the mechanics. So if she gives full thought, full attention to what she wants to say, she can't also simultaneously be bringing in her spelling skills. Do you see how that works? And one of the dangers of most writing programs is that they treat the mechanics like it's the same thing as writing. But we don't in Brave Writer. We call the mechanics of writing the transcription skills. You know, the pen or the keyboard. That's not the same thing as writing. Think about Stephen Hawking. How many books has he written? He is considered the most brilliant man living. And yet he hasn't typed a single one of his books. Why? Because he's paralyzed, because he literally physically can't. So does his typist get the byline? Does his typist get credit on the cover of that book? She might be thanked in the acknowledgments for typing, but she's not considered the author. And there was never an author who wrote a book and the reviewer at the New York Times began the review by saying, "What a masterful use of commas. So impressed with the capitalization in this piece." Because that's a given. We can certainly bring in editors or colleagues to help us with the mechanics of writing. What no one can do for the writer is think their thoughts. So if we start with the premise that the writer lives inside, we will start by valuing the content our children offer, not scrutinizing the spellings they happen to get on the screen or on the page. And we will even tell them, listen, transcription is important. These skills matter because I want to save you money. I have a friend who's a dyslexic with a PhD. He didn't write his dissertation. Or correction, he did. He wrote it by dictating it into a dictaphone and hiring a secretary to type it up for him. When he read through it, he could correct her if he didn't like her choices. What if she indented somewhere where he wanted an indentation? Or what if she used a semicolon when he really wanted a period? He could make those corrections. But on the whole, her typing skills got this work, this dissertation from the dictaphone to the page. And it was her spelling that he was relying on. When he got his PhD, did she also get one? Well, of course not. None of the research, none of the inquiry, and none of the final analysis was hers. She was a paid scribe, a secretary for his work. So why do we teach the mechanics? So that our kids don't have to hire secretaries for the rest of their lives. It is certainly much more seamless to be able to do your own typing, to do your own handwriting, to communicate with the world in the field of writing with accuracy and competence. But that is not the same thing as being a writer. Being a writer is paying attention to what you have to say, learning to generate insight, to create interesting perspectives, to be able to marshal the information and entertain or inform or educate or persuade an audience. That's why we write. And we write for an audience. We don't write for a letter grade or so we can get into college or to pass a test. Even though those are corollaries, the true goal of all those venues is to come out the other side and to actually be a writer. Someone who can face the blank page or the blank screen without intimidation, where you feel comfortable, competent, and confident. Not where you feel anxious and worried and self-editing. The way we get there then in Brave Writer is we first value that self-expression, whether it's in speech or the risk a child takes to put their own thoughts onto the page. And we reserve our judgment. We do not attack the mechanics and think that that's the same thing as improving their writing. We use copy work and dictation, someone else's writing, to teach the mechanics of writing. One of the tools that we use in Brave Writer is called the Arrow. This is a digital download that you can print and you can bind it if you want to. And what we do is we pull out different quotes from the book, 4 in a month, and we give you notes that help you understand how that passage showed up in the work of fiction to create impact on the reader. We talk about literary elements. We talk about spelling, grammar, punctuation, and the way those are used by the author to release power in the writing. Because accuracy is a pretty base level goal. Accuracy is just making sure that the readability of the piece is there for the reader. You know, nothing weird stands out. Nothing distracts them from paying attention to their meaning. But writers do more than that. They sometimes marshal things like spelling and punctuation and the sequence of their phrases and indentation and omission in order to subvert the expectations of the reader, which engages interest, which leads the person to want to keep reading. See what I'm saying? Lindsay asked a question, what age skill level would you start the Arrow program? Great question. So we say this product is for 3rd to 6th grade, but you might have a precocious 2nd grader or a 7th grader who still needs some help. We write products for a broad range of students, and you know why? Because all of them can be easily tailored up or down depending on the skill set of your child. So the information in the Arrow could be read to someone who's younger, but maybe they would only be asked to copy, you know, the first sentence, not these whole 2 paragraphs. You get to determine what length of passage your child is going to copy, how much of it is going to show up in dictation. And that varies child to child, age to age. And some 6th graders are going to struggle more than some 3rd graders. The one thing you need to know about Brave Writer is we're about the developmental stages of growth in writing, not about grades, not about ages, not about scope and sequence. We try to help you identify where your child is in the spectrum of the natural stages of development, and then we suggest a product to go with that. And when you have multiple children, it's nice, isn't it? If you can use one product and it'll cover 3 or 4 kids. I mean, I had 5 kids. I hated the thought that I had to have a grade level product for every child. That is nuts. Way too difficult to supervise. You can take a passage from a book and scale it up or down depending on the skill sets of your children. Why wouldn't you? You're at home. You get to. If you don't know what I mean when I say the natural stages of growth in writing, I highly recommend that you go to my blog and look under the most frequently viewed blog posts and click on Natural Stages of Growth in Writing. In that blog post, you will find a series of podcasts I did on each stage of development. And here's what's really fun. I did those podcasts with my oldest son, Noah. So he comments on his own experience of being raised by me, working through each of these stages of growth, and his natural, very honest, sometimes too honest reactions to what it felt like to grow as a writer in our family. So I highly commend those to you. They're free. They're just to listen to. And as you listen, don't think about your age or stage or grade levels of your children. Think about the characteristics I described and where each child might fit into that spectrum. what we really want you to do is to discover what the match is. Because if you know, let's say your sixth grader is really in the partnership writing stage, you're going to pick the products that will suit that stage of development. Never say to yourself, but he should already be XYZ place. That's like saying to a child who hasn't learned how to walk, but she should already be riding a bicycle. It's illogical, right? You don't simply put someone on a bicycle before they've ever walked just because they should be riding by age 5. You have to go in the order of the natural development process so when they get there, they're actually ready. Somebody asked, she can't seem to decide between the wand and a quiver of arrows. Okay, so the wand teaches reading in addition to writing. If your child is reading fluently or chapter books, the wand will be beneath that child's skill set. If your child, however, is reading the I Can Teach books, or I Can Read books, I guess they're called, Frog and Toad, the little bear books, those are the level where the wand starts. Somebody who knows consonant, vowel, consonant, but is just starting to realize blends and digraphs, then the wand is perfect, absolutely perfect, and I would start there. Hugely popular program. If your child is reading, though, you hand them a book and they give it back to you completed and they didn't struggle, then the quiver of arrows is the right place to start. So either of those. Let's see. Emma says, I think if we overemphasize teaching children writing and get too worried about it, it turns them off. That's true. One of the things that I have tried to encourage over the years in Brave Writer is for a parent to take delight in growth. We tend to take delight in accomplishment, in accuracy, in finished products, in writing, but we never did that with speech. You know what I mean? Like when your child said jacuzzi or biscotti or mazzazine, didn't it kind of delight you? Were you worried that they wouldn't eventually learn jacuzzi or magazine? No. And you put it in the baby book. You were excited about it. You told your mother-in-law. You laughed about it with your husband, and you all as a family started using this silly word that your child created, even after she retires it. And yet when we see spelling mistakes, I always ask parents, did you put it in the baby book? Well, maybe you should. And date it, because that adorable misspelling is going away. That is a temporary circumstance. It is a child's risk, an attempt to get meaning into letters on a page. We want to celebrate that, not be shamed by it, not feel like we're a terrible teacher. And so often when your kids do a free write, they can be sent back to it, a week later. We can ask them, hey, reread this. I know you know where capitals usually go. Can you make sure that you like your capital placement in this piece? Or read through it and let me know if you notice any words that you think are misspelled and that we can correct together. You'll be surprised when your child doesn't have to think of the original thoughts. A lot of times they naturally find their own spelling errors because now they're just using their editorial eye. They only have one task, and that is to read. And when they're reading, their mind is liberated to see whether or not something is spelled correctly. Sometimes they can't even read their own spellings. And that's a moment for you to notice, to take note somewhere else, and then to tailor the copywork and dictation passages you select to address those places that are currently weak, that need growth. Let's see what else you guys are saying here. Yesterday, I took a picture of my son's math page with backwards numbers because I knew I'd miss it when they were no longer there. Exactly. Roxandra says, I encouraged my daughter about her first poem. She wrote it at 5 years, and at 18, she was already published 4 books of wonderful poems. How about that? So here's a beautiful example of where valuing the 5-year-old's lovely risk in poetry resulted in someone who was unintimidated by poetry and now, as a young adult, is publishing entire books of poems. Isn't that beautiful? Congratulations, Roxandra. That's so wonderful. Jeanette has put a link to the Natural Stages of Growth in Writing podcast into the comment section of this live broadcast. So if you're interested in that, you can click on that link and go there. And that's true for YouTube as well. Simply go to blog.bravewriter.com and you will find the Natural Stages of Growth in Writing podcast series on the most watched or most viewed blog posts. Okay, so any other questions before I go? This has been great. Thank you for tuning in this afternoon. I would leave you with this. Writing catches on for children when they sense that you are more excited about what they want to share in the world than how well they spell it. Your charge, if you choose to accept it, the charge I give to you, is to find ways to celebrate the interior life of your child and get some of that into writing. Read it tonight at the dinner table, plop it into the library basket and read it aloud just like every other book you read to your children. Pull the car over and jot down the funny conversation you overheard in the back seat. And then remind your children of just how precious their insights and quirky personalities are to you and why it's so worth preserving those. Because as they get the experience that who they are actually delights you, they're going to want to try again to create that experience. Sometimes we forget that really our kids just want our affirmation. I mean, think about it. Don't you still want your parents' affirmation? Aren't you hoping when you see them at Thanksgiving, they're going to notice what a good job you're doing, raising your children, making the turkey, setting the table? Don't you hope for that even now as a grown adult? Imagine how much more your small children, ages 5 to 18, want to show up in your heart, how much they want you to see them, to write some of it down, and to celebrate it beyond this vanishing moment. Thanks for joining me today in the afternoon. This was really fun. And we'll do it again. I really have the desire to make sure that the West Coast and Canada on the West Coast and Alaska and Hawaii don't have to get up in the middle of the night to hear me. And I know the same for Australia. They're up right now, so I can probably reach them. It's hard to do this global community in a way that's meaningful to everybody. But I will be back again tomorrow at 8 a.m. like I do on the East Coast. And we will continue with A Gracious Space readings until we get to day 50. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you have a great afternoon. Live honestly, write bravely, and celebrate your children. Mwah. Julie Bogart here from Brave Writer. See you later.